The winter sun pressed faintly against the tall windows of the shelter, its light spilling in thin golden stripes across the concrete floor. Dust hung in the air, stirred only when a cage door rattled or a restless paw scraped against metal. Rows of kennels lined the narrow corridor, each filled with the muted scent of straw, antiseptic, and damp fur. The hush was broken only by the low hum of distant traffic and the occasional sharp bark, quick and jarring like flint striking stone. At the far end of the hall, a wheelchair creaked forward, its small wheels struggling against the uneven flooring. The girl seated within it appeared fragile, her frame thin beneath a quilted jacket, but her gaze was steady, following the shifting shadows inside the cages. Her hair had been tied back loosely, a single strand brushing her cheek whenever the draft pushed through the corridor. She did not speak, not at first, only watched as if waiting for something hidden to reveal itself. The volunteer guiding her. A woman with worn boots and a tired patience that spoke of years inside these walls, slowed her pace as the barking grew louder. Ahead, one kennel seemed to command the corridor, its occupant pacing with the restless energy of something that refused confinement. A German shepherd, its black and tan coat marked by scars that crossed like old maps, pressed its weight against. The bars, teeth bared in a flash that caught the light. The sound he made was not a bark but a guttural warning, deep and unsettled, like thunder trapped inside a chest. The girl flinched, her hands tightening against the armrests, but she didn't look away. The dog's eyes locked onto hers with unnerving precision, as though the rest of the corridor no longer existed. The volunteer muttered something, a caution, a reassurance, but it fell flat in the echo of the animal's growl. Every few seconds the shepherd lunged, iron bars, shuddering beneath his weight, nails screeching against the floor. Other dogs shifted uneasily, their own movements subdued by his presence. He was not young. The fur along his muzzle bore the faint frost of age, yet there was a raw intensity in him, something unspent and volatile, something that kept even seasoned, handlers wary. The girl's chair rolled closer, though the volunteer hesitated. The barking rose, ricocheting off the corridor walls, but the child's eyes never wavered. Her lips parted as if she meant to say something, but no sound followed. Instead, she lifted one hand slowly, fingers trembling from weakness rather than fear, and held it in the air between them. For a moment, the German shepherd froze. The sudden silence pressed heavier than the noise before it. His chest heaved, and the sheen of saliva glistened along his jaws, yet he did not lunge again. Instead, his ears twitched, his head tilted just slightly, as if some distant memory had pulled him out of rage and into pause. The corridor seemed to hold its breath. Even the other dogs quieted, their shuffling muted, their barks withheld. The girl's hand hung there, fragile in the strip of sunlight, her gaze steady as though the act itself was a question she dared the animal to answer. The shepherd stepped back once, claws tapping faintly against concrete. His growl subsided to a low rumble, not gone, but changed. No longer threat, but something unreadable. The volunteer moved quickly, reaching for the chair's handles, whispering that they should keep going. Yet the girl did not lower her hand, and the dog did not break his stare. Between them stretched a silence that felt like the edge of something vast and unknown, as though the moment itself had opened a door no one had expected. The volunteer's grip tightened, ready to pull the chair away. But in that suspended stillness, where sunlight thinned and the dog's breath clouded faintly against the bars, it was no longer clear whether the danger had passed or only begun. The volunteer's grip remained firm on the wheelchair's handles, her breath caught between urgency and restraint. The corridor was heavy with silence, broken only by the slow thrum of the German shepherd's breathing and the faint hum of a heater pushing stale warmth into the air. The girl's hand, fragile and unwavering in the strip of sun, hovered like a fragile bridge no one dared to cross. The dog shifted again, weight pressing into the concrete as if he meant to spring forward, but he didn't. Instead, he lowered, his head, ears twitching, eyes never leaving the girl's pale face. His chest expanded with each breath, and the sound had changed, less like a growl, more like something searching for shape, restrained at its edges. The volunteer whispered her name, a warning disguised as comfort, but the girl did not move. Her gaze was steady, her fingers trembling slightly with the strain of holding them aloft. Somewhere outside, wind brushed across the shelter's roof, a hollow moan seeping through the rafters. The sound threaded into the moment, unsettling but strangely fitting. The German shepherd's ears flicked, catching it, yet his stare never wavered. His body seemed caught between two instincts, the urge to defend and the shadow of something long buried, something that made him hesitate. The girl leaned forward slightly in her chair, the movement so small it might have gone unnoticed if not for the sudden stiffening of the dog's frame. His claws scraped against the floor as he adjusted his stance, the metal bars rattling softly. For the first time, the volunteer felt herself hesitate too. She had seen this dog in his worst moments, teeth bloodied from trying to chew free of his own chain, muscles straining against handlers. But she had never seen him pause like this. The girl whispered then, so faintly it was unclear if the dog or the woman behind her even heard. It was not a command, not even a word meant to soothe. It was simply sound, gentle and incomplete, like a child's voice remembering how to reach the world. The shepherd's ears lifted, his tail stiffened, and he tilted his head, an almost imperceptible shift. The tension grew heavier, not lighter, as though this stillness held more danger than his growls had. The volunteer's throat tightened. The other dogs stirred uneasily, nails ticking against the floor, low whines weaving into the silence. The corridor itself seemed to draw narrow, every sound amplified, the drip of a water bowl, the faint scuff of a paw behind metal, the uneven hum of a fluorescent bulb overhead. The German shepherd moved again, this time not with a lunge, but a slow, deliberate step back from the bars. His breath clouded faintly in the cold air spilling under the door at the far end. He lowered onto his haunches, a motion so unexpected the volunteer nearly gasped aloud. Still, his eyes did not leave the girl's. The girl's arm faltered, then dropped slowly back to her lap, exhausted by the effort. But her gaze remained, unflinching. The shepherd pressed forward again, not with force but with intent, resting his muzzle against the bars. His teeth no longer flashed. Instead, there was something unreadable in the way he pressed his weight there, quiet and still. The volunteer bent closer, whispering in urgent tones that it was time to move on, time to leave this corridor. Yet the girl shook her head slightly, her refusal clear though her voice did not join it. Her fingers curled against her lap, a pale grip of determination. The dog huffed, a sound more breath than growl, and the air carried the faint scent of him, earth, old sweat, and iron. The girl's eyes softened in that moment, though her body stayed rigid, her chair fixed in its stillness. The volunteer felt the world narrow to this quiet contest, each second stretching longer than it should. Then came a sound from the back of the shelter, a door slamming against its frame, sudden and sharp. The shepherd snapped to his feet, a deep bark bursting from his throat, filling the corridor like rolling thunder. The girl flinched, her chair jolting slightly. The volunteer tightened her grip, ready to pull her away, but the child's gaze darted not to the door, but back to the dog, as if the answer to the disturbance would be found in his reaction. The shepherd barked again, his voice carrying not just warning but urgency, something deeper, something that made the volunteer's skin prickle. His tail lashed once, sharply, and his body pressed hard against the bars, not with the wild aggression from before but with purpose. The girl's lips parted again, but no words came. Her eyes followed the shepherd's, tracking his fixed stare toward the darkened end of the corridor where the door had slammed shut, and for the first time, the volunteer felt it too, that something beyond the bars was about to change everything. Volunteer's hands were still on the chair when a draft moved through the corridor, sliding under doors and skimming the floor like a thin tide. The German shepherd lifted his head to catch it, nostrils flaring. The growl did not return. Instead, he pressed one shoulder against the bars until the metal sighed under his weight, as if he wanted the cold to pass from steel into muscle, and settle him. The girl's hand remained in the light, small and stubborn, shaking more with fatigue than fear. A fluorescent tube at the ceiling flickered, the hum shifting pitch. From the tucked-away exam room came the brief metallic clatter of a tray. The shepherd snapped toward the sound, then back to the girl, torn between two alerts only he seemed to measure. The volunteer started to pull the chair away, soft and apologetic about it, but the girl's fingers brushed her own thigh and stilled. The meaning was simple. Not yet. The dog leaned forward until his muzzle threaded through the gap between bars. No lunge this time. The motion was deliberate, careful. The volunteer nearly scolded, but something in the dog's manner cut the words off. He inhaled, slow and serious, and the ridges around his eyes deepened. The girl's breath made a ghost of fog in the strip of winter sun. The shepherd's ears softened back. His tail, held rigid moments ago, lowered a fraction and tapped twice against the metal pan that served as a bed. Another shift of air rolled along the corridor, bringing a mix of damp concrete and disinfectant, and beneath it, the faint sourness of stale heater exhaust. The dog's gaze broke from the girl long enough to tilt toward the ceiling vent. He whined, a thin, unusual note, then looked back to her and gave one single bark, not the kind that claimed space, but the kind that called attention. Every other kennel stirred to answer, but he did not repeat it. Instead, he sat. No one had asked him to. He sat square and waiting, the posture of an animal who once understood what it meant to be given a job. The volunteer shifted her weight. She tilted the chair handles from side to side to keep the small wheels from catching in a groove. "He does this sometimes," she said, though it came out sounding less certain than usual. "Then he forgets himself." Yet the shepherd did not forget. He held the sit through another long inhale and exhale, eyes on the girl as if they were measuring time together. The girl finally spoke, just loud enough to make the words travel. "He's not angry." The effort of saying it left her pale. She lifted her hand an inch higher, and the tremor returned in a series of tiny judders. The volunteer bent to check the child's palms, too cold, too thin, and the dog watched the motion with a steadiness that seemed to put his pacing into the past tense. A metal door at the far end of the hall opened on a white rush of air, a chiuisbini. Man with a toolbox entered, leaving a wedge of outside sky visible for a heartbeat. Flat gray pressing on chain link, a lone sparrow thrown sideways by the wind. The man nodded toward them and passed, his boots squeaking faintly. The shepherd's head tracked him, and something old and hard flickered in the dog's posture, then gone. He returned to the girl, as if choosing where his attention belonged. The volunteer lifted a blanket from the chair's back and draped it over the girl's knees. At the touch of wool, the child exhaled in a tight, relieved sound, and her shoulders loosened. The dog caught that change. He stood again, paced a single loop in the confined space, and touched the bars with his forepaws. No slam, just contact, before easing down to press his chest along the metal at floor level where the warmth from the corridor gathered. The girl lowered her hand, and for the first time it hovered near the dog instead of suspended in air. Wind worried at the building, tugging at loose siding. The lights hummed in a different key, thinner. The volunteer glanced toward the ceiling, and listened in the way of someone who had learned to respect small signs. A different hum, a draft where there shouldn't be one, dogs going quiet when they usually didn't. She looked back to the shepherd. He was staring not at the child now, but at the underside of her chair, nose working, careful and precise, as if reading a sentence only he could see. "You can smell it, can't you?" the volunteer murmured, not sure who she was speaking to. The shepherd's response was movement, not sound. He lay down flat, nose to the gap where rubber met concrete, and then he lifted one paw and set it gently against the bar at the level of the girl's ankle. The paw stayed there, not pushing, just present. The girl's face changed, softer, then tense again, like a tide drawing back before it returns. "I'm okay," she said, and immediately corrected herself with an honesty that made the words heavier. "I think I'm okay." The volunteer crouched, hands steady but eyes alert now in a new way. She checked the girl's wrist, felt the flutter there, counted quietly. The shepherd's breathing synced to the counting as if he, too, kept tempo. From somewhere past the office, a door thumped shut, the sound dull and distant. The gray light at the man door tightened. Sleet was coming, a suggestion of restless beads on metal. Inside, the air grew still. The dog pushed his paw a fraction higher, then withdrew it, as if he had asked and been refused. He rose with a grunt that betrayed age and limped, barely noticeable unless you'd been watching as long as the volunteer had, then returned to that square sit. He stared at the girl and flicked his eyes to the volunteer's hands, then back to the girl. A sequence. A pattern. The volunteer stood slowly, towering over both child and dog, and made a decision without letting it reach her mouth. She tapped. The chairs break, not to leave, but to anchor them. Then she reached for the ring of keys at her belt. Metal chimed. The shepherd's ears snapped forward, not in hunger for freedom, but in recognition of ritual. Outside, the wind climbed. One step higher. Inside, breath shortened to a shared economy. "Just a second," the volunteer said, though it was more for herself than for the child. She chose a key by touch and turned it over in her palm, weighing price against possibility. The shepherd remained planted, gaze steady, tail still. Hindi-tung-ziu did not bark. He waited, and the waiting itself felt like a test. The lock's cylinder showed a faint bloom of rust around the edges. When the volunteer leaned in, the smell of old metal and wet hair rose close. The key hovered at the lip of the keyway, unentered, and the girl watched the dog with the patience of someone who had lived long hours inside rooms where patience was the only instrument left. A crisp sound cracked the quiet. Distant, outside. Car backfiring or thunder's first dry cough. It trembled along the roof and settled in the vents. The shepherd flinched, caught himself, and looked back at the chair's small front wheel, nose dipping once as if to say the danger wasn't out there at all. The volunteer closed her hand around the key until the edges bit into her skin. Between. The hum of the lights and the hush of the kennels. The question formed itself without anyone speaking it. She set her palm to the lock and, with her other hand, braced the door. The key had not yet turned when the girl whispered, "If you do, don't let go." The volunteer's hands hovered over the wheelchair handles, the weight of hesitation pressing into her shoulders. The corridor seemed narrower now, the sunlight that once stretched across the concrete dimming into thin, fractured beams as clouds drifted past the shelter's high windows. The girl's hand remained in the air, fragile but steady, a thin bridge suspended in silence. The German shepherd's breath came rough and deliberate, each exhale fogging the bars before dispersing into the cool air. His ears flicked forward, then back, caught in a rhythm of uncertainty. No one in the hall moved. Even the dust, lit briefly in shafts of light, seemed unwilling to fall. Then, with the smallest shift, the shepherd lowered his head, not in surrender but in some quiet recalibration, as though reassessing the strange stillness between them. The girl's fingers trembled, not from fear, but from the weakness that had carried her into the chair in the first place. Yet she did not pull her hand back. Her gaze held fast, unblinking, fixed on the animal whose presence seemed to eclipse every sound, every motion around them. Then, a sudden crack of thunder outside rattled the walls, followed by the lash of wind against the shelter's siding. The shepherd flinched, teeth flashing, the growl rising again from deep within his chest. The volunteer moved instantly, tugging at the chair to retreat, but the girl resisted, her small body stiffening as she clutched the armrest with her other hand. It was then that the shepherd did something no one expected. Instead of lunging, he pressed his body against the bars and barked, not the deep, hostile warning from before, but sharp, rapid bursts as though sounding an alarm. His eyes darted from the girl to the window, back again, frantic and insistent. The volunteer froze, her breath caught between instinctive fear and dawning confusion. She had seen aggression, defiance, hunger, all the raw currencies of shelter dogs who had lost their place in the world. But this was different. The sound carried urgency, a strange insistence, as though he was trying to drag human attention toward something unseen. The girl, pale beneath the shifting light, tilted her head as if listening for something beyond the dog's voice. The storm outside grew louder, rain beginning to drum against the roof, the wind seeping through cracks with a low, mournful whistle. The shepherd's pacing grew violent again, claws striking sparks against the cement, his bark echoing until the other dogs stirred restlessly in their cages. The volunteer stepped back, unsettled by the shift, her voice low but firm as she whispered, "To the child, we need to go." Yet the girl shook her head almost imperceptibly, her hand still lifted, palm open toward the cage. The dog stopped abruptly. His chest heaved, sides rising and falling like a bellows. His eyes, wild with some internal fire, narrowed and then softened by a fraction, enough to carry the suggestion of restraint. The pause was brief, almost invisible, but in it lay the first hint that his rage was not without direction. The storm roared above, water running down the narrow windows like liquid glass. The girl lowered her trembling hand at last, not in defeat, but in a strange recognition that the moment had shifted into something neither threat nor safety. The volunteer reached again for the wheelchair handles, her grip tighter now, her pulse visible in her throat. Just as she prepared to turn them away, a sharp metallic clang rang out from deeper in the shelter, a door, perhaps, or a lock struck loose by the storm's sudden violence. The shepherd's head snapped toward the sound, ears rigid, body pressed, taut against the bars. His growl returned, not at the girl, but at the unseen space beyond the corridor. The girl's eyes widened, following his stare into the dim passage. Her lips parted, breath shallow, as if she, too, sensed that whatever lay beyond that sound was what he had been warning them about all along. The clang still echoed in the corridor when the shepherd thrust his body forward, teeth flashing. His growl no longer wild, but sharpened with intent. The girl gripped her chair's armrest, her breath shallow, eyes fixed on the dark passage where the sound had come. The volunteer steadied herself, torn between fear and the dawning realization that the dog's fury was not meant for them. From the shadows a figure emerged, not an intruder, but another animal. A smaller dog, ribs sharp beneath a matted coat, stumbled into the light, limping from the storm-shaken side door that had cracked open. The shepherd's barking turned violent again, not at the girl, not at the volunteer, but toward the space. Behind the wounded stray, warning off the unseen danger of the storm and its chaos. The smaller dog collapsed just inside the hall, whimpering, body shivering with cold and fear. The shepherd pressed against the bars, straining with a sound that was no longer menace but demand. His claws raked the floor, desperate for release. The volunteer hesitated, her hands trembling as she reached for the latch, knowing the risk, yet sensing that the meaning of all this anger lay in that moment. The cage door creaked open, slow and uncertain. Instead of lunging, the German shepherd slipped past her knees with the fluid urgency of instinct. He went straight to the collapsed dog, lowering his massive head, touching muzzle to frail fur. The growl dissolved into a low whine, the sound of recognition, of duty carried too long behind steel. The girl's hand rose again, not toward him this time, but toward the smaller dog, as if to complete what he had begun. The corridor grew. Still. Rain softened into a muted patter on the roof, the storm retreating as suddenly as it had come. The shepherd remained beside the stray, his scarred frame tense but protective, his gaze no longer wild. In his stillness lay the revelation. His aggression had never been aimless. It had been the language of an animal trapped, warning, guarding, carrying a responsibility no one had cared to read. The volunteer exhaled, slow and unsteady, the truth settling heavy in her chest. She looked at the girl who watched with quiet certainty, her fragile body leaning forward as if she had always known the rage was not madness, but burden. Outside, the light began to fade. Through the high windows, a pale glow spilled over the wet ground, turning every droplet into a fleeting spark before the dusk claimed it. The German shepherd lowered himself to the floor beside the smaller dog, his chest rising and falling in sync with its shallow breaths. The girl lifted her hand. Once more, palm open, not asking, not commanding, only offering. This time, the shepherd met it halfway, his nose brushing the air just inches from her skin. The gesture was small, almost invisible, but it held the weight of release, of something broken finding shape again. As the corridor dimmed and the shelter settled into silence, the image remained. A scarred dog lying guard over the weak, a fragile child holding her hand steady in the fading light, and in that fragile balance of loyalty and survival, something unspoken passed between them, as quiet and enduring as the last streak of daylight dissolving into night.